Hey guys, my name is Katarina Berry, and in today's video I want to share my journey to becoming an art model and what that did to my self-image and my relationship with my body. Before we get started, I want to ask you to please click the subscribe button down below and also click the bell button to get notified every time I upload a video. First of all, I want to welcome you to my channel. I am an empath and I love sharing my journey in this life with the world. So I'm very happy to have you here, and let's get started. You're probably wondering, what's an art model? So technically an art model is really a model that poses for any kind of visual artists. And that can be photographers, that can be painters, that can be sculptors. Most often though, it is referring to a model that poses for artists in an environment much like a class where everyone is sketching. So it's usually more than one person, and everyone is drawing that model from different angles, and it's live, it's happening live. So of course, most famous term of model usually refers to a fashion model or a photography model, and that's a little different. An art model is someone who holds a pose for a continuous period of time, ranging from 2 minutes to 25 to even 30 minutes. And in most cases, when a term art model is referring to a model that poses for sketches, for drawings and for paintings, there are two types of these kind of sketching environments. First one would be a portrait model. So that would be someone who sits for a portrait, and what gets painted is anywhere from their face, their full face, to kind of beginning of their chest area. Now, I've also had experience posing for a sculptor, and that would be posing for a bust. It's a very similar thing, and what gets sculpted in that case is kind of this area from your head to your chest, somewhat, and wherever the cutoff line is. I'm not exactly sure. I think it depends on the artist, but the focus of the portrait or the bust is the face and the head, and the shape of your eyes, ears, your lips, your neck, your hair, all of that. And then of course there's the figure model, which is a little different. The figure model gets to pose for artists nude, usually, and in this case what gets drawn is the entire body of that model. And figure drawing is an art of its own class, and it's quite complex. Most people, most artists that I've worked with, they use charcoal or pastels. Some use a little bit of color, some use paint, but because the poses are kind of rapid and because there's a lot of rotation that's happening between these poses, usually you don't have that much time to use mediums like color or different types of paints, like oils or acrylics or watercolors or any other types of colors. But the time is so limited that it's important to capture as much as you can, and most of the time you don't really have that much room to apply the color, although some artists do that later, and some artists I've seen use color, and they are typically a little more experienced because they're able to capture the shape faster and they have more time left to apply the color. So now I want to go a little bit into the background of how I ended up being an art model, and I'm going to go a little way back, not a little, but way back. And I want to go back to when I was a little girl, and I grew up with a lot of body issues. I was very bullied, very severely bullied by my ballet teacher in my ballet class, and I made a separate video about that, and it was kind of hard to make, but I also mentioned art modeling in it. So if you're interested in checking it out, it's going to be linked somewhere above here. With that experience left me very disconnected from feeling like I deserve to even be a female. I was so humiliated and ashamed of myself, and I felt so inadequate and so very, very out of touch with my body, with my physical body, and it was quite devastating for me. So on top of that, I experienced some bullying in school because I was always full-figured. And now, at 26 years old, I am 6 feet and 3 inches tall. But I was always a very tall child. And growing up, that made things a little more complicated. I was taller than everyone in my class, and I was kind of full-figured, and so that attracted a lot of bullying, a lot of cruel remarks, and that made me even more disconnected from my physical body. I felt very out of control of how I looked. I felt very self-conscious, and I didn't feel beautiful. I tried to convince myself to kind of get this sense of confidence that I like the way that I look, that I feel comfortable in my body, but it was very difficult to do because deep inside I felt very inadequate, very abnormal, very ugly in that sense. Also, what didn't quite help, and I'm sure a lot of women can relate to this, is growing up with all these magazines, fashion magazines, featuring photoshopped, most of the time, models that I didn't, of course, think it was photoshopped. I thought that's how a woman's body is supposed to look like. There is no other way. And now the magazines are becoming, and the fashion world is becoming a lot more inclusive towards the full-figured shapes. There's a lot of body or body positive plus size models, which is extremely exciting for me. But back then, the only type of model that I could see in a magazine would be very skinny, very slender, very almost like skin and bones. And there's nothing wrong with that type of shape, but that was the only shape that I saw that I felt like was, the ideal for a woman, for any woman. And I was so far from that ideal, even as a young woman, as a teenager, as a girl, and seeing that made me feel like there was no way I would ever look like this, and it made me kind of depressed about the way that I looked. It was not a good feeling. The disconnect continued, and the gap became wider and wider, and my feelings about myself became worse and worse. So the only exception that I've ever seen were these paintings in museums. And I grew up in Moscow, Russia, and so there's a lot of different museums there, and my grandmother, my mother, my family there, they would take me to all these different museums so that I could be exposed to art, so that I would grow up cultured, and I really enjoyed these visits. I really enjoyed what I saw in the museums. The shapes that I saw in these paintings that were much older, sometimes centuries older. They were from different time periods that were quite distant to our times now. And the women were much more real looking. They were they had different shapes and different figures, and a lot of them were full-figured, and a lot of them were painted naked, and there were lots of portraits too with all these different faces that weren't so photoshopped, and it was beautiful. I loved it, and I loved seeing that, and I thought that these pieces of art were absolutely stunning, and I wondered a few times, I remember growing up, what would it be like to pose for one of these paintings? And of course, I didn't really see many examples of that happening in my time, many paintings like that being created, or many women being models for paintings. It just seemed like it was from a different time in history. And although I felt very inspired and very intrigued and very mesmerized by these works of art, it felt like it belonged to a different time, and that it had little to do with our times now and with me, with my body. So although that was an inspiration, it didn't really give me much hope for how I would come to see myself. And so that was just kind of something that I remember, that was a positive encounter with feminine beauty, and a different one that was different from my bullying, from these magazines, and from everything that I saw on TV and so on. Now I want to talk a little bit about how I got started with being an art model. So what happened was my good friend Barbara Young, who is a very, very talented artist herself and who lives in near the community where I live, which is Columbia, South Carolina, and we encountered each other on several occasions, and I knew she was an artist, and I saw her artwork, and it was beautiful. And she told me one day, she said, you know, you'd make a really good art model. And I just looked at her and I thought, yeah, that'd be great if we were living, you know, in a different century maybe, but now I'm not so sure. And I said, yeah, okay, thank you. I thought it was a nice thing to say, and I didn't really take it seriously. But she said to me, she said, well, would you do it? Would you pose for a portrait? And I said, well, yes, if I ever get a chance to, I will definitely do that. And she said, okay, I'll keep that in mind. And I was like, okay, sure, that sounds great. And I kind of forgot about that, and it made me smile, and it was kind of intriguing for a second to think about it. But then I thought, you know, that what is the likelihood that's going to happen? And then one day, about a year and a half ago, from now, I got a call, and I got a call from an artist who holds a class for other artists, which it's not like a college class, it's like a gathering of artists. They gather very regularly, and they paint models. And I didn't really know about that group, but an artist called me and said, your friend Barbara Young referred you to us and said that you are willing to pose for us for portraits, and we would love to have you. And I said, wow, yes, I'm in. And it turned out to be a paid gig, which I was surprised by, because at that time, hearing that, I was more than willing to pose just for the experience. But he said, no, we pay our models, and that's usually how it works. And so it's going to be about 2 hours, and we will be expecting you on a date and on a certain time. And please come 5 minutes early and be prepared. And I said, okay. And so I showed up, and that was my very first experience. I was painted by, I would say, there were at least 15 artists in the room. And with portrait modeling, there's more time, and it's not that many poses. It's just one pose. That, in my experience, what happened then was I held a pose, which is just sitting pretty much still with a certain facial expression that you shouldn't really change, for 25 minutes at a time, and then you get a break, and then you do it again. And I think we did it about four sessions of 25 minutes each with breaks. And it was thrilling. It was so exciting. And my Russian grandmother told me, you're probably going to get tired of sitting still. It's very difficult to hold a pose. And to me, it was not difficult at all. It was just so exciting. I couldn't believe all these people, all these artists are sitting there painting me. And so because the poses are a little longer, artists are able to use color and apply different paints. So it's a little different from the figure sketching, where there's a lot of rotation. And so it was a mind-blowing experience to me. It was life-changing, because when I got up and when I got to walk around the room and look at all these different portraits of myself, I realized they were all different faces. I mean, they kind of looked like me, all of them did look like me somewhat, but they were more reflecting the artists and what each particular artist saw. It was less about who I am or who I think I am, and it was all about what they saw. And so I had this earth-shattering realization that, wow, no one sees the same thing. No one sees me as the same me that I think that I am. Everyone sees me differently. It's all about their perception, their perspective, and that just blew my mind. It was such an amazing experience. It just changed my entire world, and I became addicted to that feeling of, wow, I get to inspire so many art pieces in one sitting. How is that possible? So fast forward to about maybe half a year later, I realized that I wanted to try figure modeling because no one really offered that to me at first. And then I think, at least in my experience, usually there are models that do this, that are comfortable doing figure modeling, and they kind of seek out these types of organizations, artists, classes, and they apply. And no one really says, hey, would you like to pose for us nude? It just doesn't really happen. But so in my case, I knew that was the other side. There was this other layer. With the same group, they did also figure sketching, figure drawing classes. And so when I realized that I wanted to do it, and it was actually beginning of 2019, beginning of this year, I expressed that I was interested in posing for a figure drawing class. And I was told that I'm welcome to do that. So they booked me pretty much immediately, and I started getting ready for my first figure modeling gig. And I was very nervous because, as I mentioned, I had all these different body issues growing up. I had all these bullying experiences, and at the same time I had this memory of these beautiful pieces of art that I've seen in these museums of all these beautiful women and their beautiful full figures, their beautiful natural selves. And I was kind of, something inside of me, something in my soul, in my heart, told me, this is the way. This is the way to really heal that pain, that disconnect from seeing myself as worthy of being a female, of loving my body, of accepting myself just the way that I am. This is the step. This is something that I can do that will help. And so I knew I had to do it. Even though I was scared, I knew I had to go for it. I knew that there was something in that for me, especially as much as I loved posing for portraits. So I did my first figure modeling class, and I did not know what to expect. I looked up some poses. I didn't really know what to do in terms of poses, and I didn't know what to expect. Yes, there was some deep part of me that was still so afraid of all this cruelty and all this bullying, and that part of me thought, what if they're gonna be like, oh, we don't want to paint you, you're not beautiful enough, you don't look good enough, your body is ugly, and of course that didn't happen, but there was that part of me that was terrified. And I remember what it felt like posing for figure sketching for the first time, and it was amazing, because once I realized that there was no judgment, there was no intimidation, there was no bullying, no rejection, and that these artists were just working on their pieces, were just sketching, and they were focused on the work that they were creating. They weren't concerned, they weren't judging me, they weren't dissecting the way that I looked, and they weren't, they definitely were not diminishing the way that I felt about myself. It was the contrary. They were so encouraging, so welcoming, so professional. It's such a professional environment. It's nothing strange or weird. It's nothing like that. It's not like any kind of adult industry. It has nothing to do with any sexual energy whatsoever. It is purely a work of art, and all these people there that are sketching you while you pose, they're extremely focused on their work because, first of all, they have a very limited time to capture your figure, your shape, because each pose has a certain time limit cut off where you have to switch it, and then they can't really continue what they were drawing before. So it's a very focused environment. And second, these people come there to draw. They don't come there for any other reason. And I realized how appreciative these artists are to have an ability to draw someone who is alive, to draw a live human form, instead of drawing from a picture or drawing from another painting or drawing from a sculpture perhaps even. They get to draw a human form that is in front of them. And there is a lot of appreciation for that because everyone kind of gets to see every pose from a different angle depending on where they are sitting in the room. And for everyone, that perspective is very different. That vantage point determines what they're seeing. And for every person in every place in the room, that vantage point is different, and you are positioned kind of in the center. And I also had this realization that I wasn't modeling what a woman should look like or what anyone should look like. I was merely modeling a human body. It's like everyone is worthy of modeling a human body because we're all human beings and we all have a body. And so whatever your body looks like, it's human, and that's the only requirement for that type of modeling. It's not, whether you're skinnier than the other person, whether you're taller than the other person, or whether you're more pretty according to a specific standard than another person. There's no comparison, there's no judgment. It's simply being a model of what it is like to have a body. And it's so inclusive, it's so beautiful, it's so liberating. It was an amazing experience. And so that started this path for me where I realized that's going to be part of my life because it healed this anguish within myself, that disconnect, that shame, that self-hatred, that separation that I felt from what I looked like growing up. And it was such a transformative experience. It was so thrilling. It was so exciting. It was so beautiful. And I realized that I will do this again and again and again and again. And so I started seeking out these types of classes in my local area and in some surrounding nearby areas as well. I started letting these artists know that I love modeling, that I'm really enjoying this experience, and that if they're looking to book a model, I am available. And I started getting gigs pretty regularly. Now, of course, all these groups have several models that they rotate because it's good to draw different forms. You don't want to be drawing the same exact body over and over again. So every once in a while, I'll revisit these groups. And I think one of my dreams is to travel in the United States and maybe in the world and get to pose in different places. And I've acquired quite a collection of these pieces of artwork that these artists would give to me. And some of them do that, some of them don't. Some of them like to keep their art, and some don't mind giving away a drawing or two. And I think one of the highlights was being drawn by a very celebrated local artist and art curator, and the one piece that he made of me made it to an exhibit that I believe was recently displayed, and that was a big honor. And the biggest honor in that experience was that this artist told me after the session, it was a little more private. There were just a few artists in that one, and he told me some models pose and other models inspire, and that was such a big compliment. With that, I want to kind of move on to a few realizations, and these realizations are, there's a difference between being a model and just sitting still and kind of not moving and being naked, or for a portrait not being naked, and being a muse. And to me, that distinction is very important, because I see myself as a muse, and I've kind of cultivated that perception and that art, because what it means to me to be a muse is to really channel the mood of the pose. So each pose that I hold, to me, has a meaning. There's an expression, and then there's some kind of a message, some kind of a feeling that this pose displays. And I really like to submerge myself into the feeling while I hold the pose. And to me, that's extremely important, because I think that really connects what I'm doing to what is being created by the artists. Another realization that I had is that it's really not you. Just like my first experience with portraits, where I realized that everyone was drawing a different face based on what they saw through the prism of their own perception, I also realized that when it comes to figure drawing, what the artists are looking at are the reflection of light and shadow off of your body. So they're not really focused on you as a human, as a person, as a persona, as a name and a face and a personality. They're focused on what they see in terms of the shape and the how the light falls, and how you cast the shadow, and that's what really their main concern is. So it's very liberating, because at first, of course, I was kind of self-conscious, but then I realized there's no need to be self-conscious. There's no need to, suck the belly in and be like, look skinny, or try to be something that I'm not, or try to look like more pretty, or all these mental things that, all these self-conscious kind of fidgety, attributes that I thought would be expected, but no, no, none of that. In fact, the more natural, the more relaxed, the more kind of embodied in the pose that you are, the better, because the more you can hold it, and the more you can really truly be in that stillness and really hold that expression that your pose conveys. And another realization is that all artists really can benefit from encouragement. So at the end of the session, or while on the break, I like going around and looking at the pieces that are being created, looking at the artwork that the artists are producing, and I love complimenting them on their work, and it means so much to them. Their faces just light up, and they're like, really, you like it? You think it's good? I'm trying really hard, and I think I'm making progress. You really like it? And it's so amazing, inspiring. It's so beautiful that not only do I get to inspire the artwork, not only do I get to channel that inspiration, but I also get to encourage and contribute to the progress of the artist's growth. And that, to me, is what being a muse really feels like. And it's a beautiful feeling. There's nothing quite like it, really nothing like it anywhere else in the world. In my world, in my life, it's completely unique, and it's beautiful in every way. And another realization is that I recently actually posed for a group of artists that were all women, and some do not really get out of the house that much. Some were artists, some were just kind of newbies and wanted to see what it would be like to draw figures from a live model. And Some of these women were moms that really rarely make it out of their house because they don't have time and they have the kids and all that stuff. And one of the women said to me, she said, you know, I'm really amazed by you kind of just being here like nude and you're able to hold these poses and you're okay with that. And I'm so inspired by that because I rarely even, you know, allow myself to be naked at my house when no one's around, when no one sees me. And it touched me in a very special way because I know where she's coming from. I know what it feels like to feel disconnected from your body, to feel embarrassed or ashamed or not feel good about what you look like, what your body looks or feels like. And I shared with her my story. I shared why I even started figure drawing or figure modeling. And she listened and we had this very special moment. And she said that it was a very important night for her because something changed. She saw something different, and it kind of gave her this feeling that maybe she can accept herself a little more as well. And that was the most empowering thing that I think I've ever experienced with figure modeling. I want to finally, to wrap up this video, share a few secrets with you guys that if you are watching this video because you're about to try figure modeling or even portrait modeling, you're considering it maybe, or maybe you're just curious, I want to share a few things that I've learned from my experience over, or I think a little under a year, but having been drawn quite a few times in that span. I learned these following secrets. So secret number one is to focus as much as you can on self-care the day off, the day before, but the day off especially. If you know that you have a figure modeling or even a portrait modeling arrangement coming up and you are feeling nervous, you are not really sure how it's going to go, maybe it's your first time, you're a little maybe freaking out even, and you don't know how it's all going to turn out, and I would suggest doing as much as you can for yourself. So whatever self-care means to you, if it's taking a bath, if it's doing a face mask, if it's applying some really luxurious creams on your body, or going to a yoga session, or going to a sauna, or or doing something extra for yourself physical, maybe lighting some candles, maybe meditating, listening to some relaxing music, maybe wearing your favorite dress, even though you might not be wearing it during the session. But it's these little things can really make a big difference when you're getting ready for something that makes you feel a little nervous. And I always practice that, and it does make a difference for me. Now, I don't wear any makeup to any of these figure drawing sessions because I don't want any contrast in my skin tone anywhere, because just doing your face and neck, that might look a little different from the rest of your body. So I like to go without any makeup whatsoever, but I do usually apply some creams, do a face mask, do some nice kind of self-appreciation therapy. Whatever makes me happy. I usually do yoga, or I'll go and work out. I enjoy working out actually, so I'll go and work out a little extra, and that kind of puts me in a more physical kind of presence. It connects me more to my body. It makes me feel more in my body, and that certainly is helpful. So another thing that another secret that I can share is research the poses in advance, because even though I've done this several times now, I still research the poses. I still look into what different beautiful art pieces there are throughout history, what different poses these women held, what are the poses in general. So I'll look for some sources of inspiration, and I'll look generally at some sketch classes materials, and just kind of brainstorm a little bit, see what kind of mood I want to channel. But usually it's still, don't overthink it, it's still spontaneous. And here's the next secret. you really got to test out the pose, especially if it's a longer pose, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes. You definitely want to research that pose, and not even research, but like test it out. So get into it. And usually you have small breaks between the poses if you're doing figure modeling, and test out the pose. If it doesn't feel comfortable, don't choose it. Switch to a different pose. It's okay, because I've made this mistake several times. I'd select a pose that is so uncomfortable, that is just torturous, and I held it for the longest period of time, and of course it was, I had to take extra breaks because my arm would get tired, or my leg, or whatever. And it was the first few times I did figure draw, because I was not so confident. I didn't really feel good about saying, oh wait, that's not the ideal pose for me, let me switch it to something more comfortable. But then I learned to do that, because you want to be comfortable, because otherwise it's very hard to hold the pose if you're not comfortable. And it just distracts you, and it distracts others, and then you have to take all these extra breaks, and it just creates more trouble than you would have caused if you would just said, listen, this is not going to work for me, let me choose a different pose. And while holding the pose, some have asked me, like, how do you possibly hold this pose for so long? How can you sit still and not move for like 25 minutes? I tend to meditate while I'm holding a pose. I tend to get into the zone of meditating and really just being in this meditative presence. I'll focus on the thought, or on this kind of mood or expression of the pose, and then I'll just really go deep into that feeling. And I try not to let my mind wander too much, because that might make me a little fidgety, or that might make me like count down the time, how much time is left, count down the seconds. That I would not recommend that. That's very mentally exhausting. And the best thing is to relax into the pose and just kind of accept that moment, and just accept that you're gonna be in it for a while, and relax into it as much as possible, and really channel the mood that your pose expresses, and be still. And there's beauty in that. And once you really get into the hang of it, there's something very special in that. It really truly is like a meditation. There's some spiritual component to it even, and I personally really love it. The last few secrets that I have left is to remember two things. That first of all, you're a mirror. Don't be so self-conscious. Don't be insecure. Don't feel in any way kind of inadequate, because there's no sense in that. You're just a reflection of what the artist sees, and it's not about you. It's about them. Actually, it's about their vantage point. It's about what they see. It's not about you, it's about them, actually. And it's about, like I said, the light and the shadow, and it's not about you. There is no judgment in that process. There is no discernment. There is no comparison. It's just the artist and their vision. And you're simply a mirror to that vision. And that's the way that I like to look at it. It's very liberating. And the second kind of side of that secret is, you're worthy. You have to realize you are worthy. This is not a fashion model type situation. This is not a contest of beauty. This is not a comparison game. You are simply a representation of a human body. So there is no comparison in that. It's just you being an example of what a human body looks like. And that's very beautiful, because every human being is worthy of that. Every human being that has a body, which would be every human being, is worthy of being an art model, because all you have to have is a body, and that body is worthy of representing what a human body looks like, because it is a human body. I know I'm repeating things, but that made me really connect with my body and with myself, and really love and accept myself more than I have ever been able to in my entire life, because that made me realize that all this comparison, all this judgment, all the meanness, and all the bullying that I might have experienced early in life, it's all in the past, because the biggest realization that I took away from all of my experiences being an art model is that I'm worthy of self-love, because I am a human and I have a body, and my body deserves to be loved, and I deserve to feel good in my body, because that's the only body that I have. There is no other body that I can have. I have this one, and I have to love it, because it gives me so much joy, it gives me so much strength, it gives me the ability to move around, experience pleasure, experience things, and walk, and you know, and pose, and have these expressions, and you know, explore the world around me, and that's beautiful. There's no sense in comparing yourself to others. There's no sense in saying, you know, this person is more beautiful than the other person. It doesn't. Whoever wants to do this can do this, but really that doesn't make any sense, because we're all different, we're all unique, all of our bodies are unique, and no one is exactly like the other person. So what if we just accepted ourselves for who we are? What if we just accepted that having a body is a blessing in itself, and that beyond that, all you can really do is to learn to love your body and appreciate your body and take care of your body, and to be proud of it, and to feel good in it, to feel connected to it, to feel appreciative of it. And that's what figure modeling has done for me, and I am eternally grateful for that. It really changed my life, and I wish to remain an art model for the rest of my life. Now, that's not my main source of income, and that's not the main focus of my career, but I don't ever want to stop doing that. I don't ever want to stop being an art model. I want to be an art model even if I'm blessed to live into my 60s and 70s and possibly even 80s. Why not? I'll still be human. I'll still have a body, and whatever it looks like, it's still a body, and it's a human body, and so it's worthy of representing what a human body looks like. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. It means so much to me. It's such an important subject to me. It's been one of the biggest realizations, one of the biggest breakthroughs that I've had in 2019, very, very major transformation for the way that I see myself and the way that I connect to my physical form. So I appreciate you tuning in to see this video. I hope it was helpful if you're considering becoming an art model, whether for portrait, for figure, for other disciplines such as sculpting or even photography, any kind of modeling. I hope this was helpful to you, and I encourage you to give it a shot, and don't be so nervous, and don't overthink it. This is not about thinking. This is about being. This is the art of being. There is no thinking involved in this. This is simply being, and being still, and accepting yourself, and accepting yourself enough to be present and to be an inspiration to others. So on this note, I will see you in my next video, and until then, love you all so very much. I hope you can feel my love. Bye.